This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and today we're doing an Android 10-inch smackdown between the Asus ePad Transformer Prime here on my left and the Motorola XYBoard 10.1 on the right, known as the Zoom 2 in Europe. We're going to do an Android 10-inch tablet smackdown between two second-generation tablets. This is the Asus Transformer Prime here on the right, very popular, hot tablet right now, very hard to get a hold of, and it's the first quad-core NVIDIA Tegra 3 tablet. And this is the Motorola XYBoard 10.1, otherwise known as the Zoom 2 in Europe. And this guy has a second-generation dual-core CPU and 4G LTE. Now, the philosophies behind these are pretty different in a way, at least for the American versions of these, where Transformer Prime goes for a low price and targets the enthusiast market, whereas the XYBoard goes for a little bit more of the corporate Verizon customer kind of clientele. With great customer support, obviously, you can go to any Verizon store and get help with the product. It's got LTE 4G, of course it also has Wi-Fi, and a couple of other neat features we'll talk about, but it is considerably more expensive too. Now, though these are both 10-inch tablets and they weigh about the same, the Asus ePad Transformer Prime weighs 1.29 pounds and the XYBoard weighs 1.33 pounds, you can see that they have a different kind of footprint. In terms of width and height, the Transformer Prime is a bit larger. We put them on top of each other and you can see that. So that's a considerable difference right there between two 10-inch tablets. In terms of thickness, they're very similar. They're both about 1/3 of an inch. The Transformer Prime is a few hundredths of an inch thinner. It looks a little bit thinner because it has a more immediate taper, whereas the XYBoard has a more gradual taper. In terms of ergonomics, we've already discussed this in our individual video reviews of these products, but Transformer Prime has this very pretty brushed aluminum back. It's also very slippery, and because it is thin and there's no rubber anywhere, it's really not the easiest thing to hold on to. It's an awful lot like the iPad 2 in that respect. Now, the XYBoard also goes with metal on the back. You can see we have an aluminum panel here. By the way, this resists scratching more than the Transformer Prime's does. But we've got this rubber over here that makes it easier to grip, hold on to, and also gives it better RF windows for reception, since the Transformer Prime has some notorious problems with the GPS and sometimes a little bit weaker on the Wi-Fi front, though ours is pretty good with that. But you can see with the cut-off tapered corners here, it's very nice to hold, and because it is a little bit smaller, it's definitely the more ergonomic tablet. Now, in terms of build, the XYBoard is built like a tank. It may not be thick, but just like the original Motorola Zoom, man, you can hurt somebody with this thing. It's very rigid, it's very dense, the rubber on the corners protects it. This feels like something you can just throw in your bag and not worry about it so much. The Transformer Prime is a lot like the iPad 2 and the Samsung Galaxy Tab 10.1. It's very beautiful, it's very thin, it's very light, but you get a sense that it's fairly fragile also. Not that it flexes a lot, it's not flexing like crazy, but you know what I mean. It just doesn't feel reinforced, that there's no rubber to absorb shock, that kind of thing. This is something you want a case for, both in terms of carrying it around because, well, the bugger is slippery, and also because, well, it feels like it needs some protection. In terms of pricing, the Asus ePad Transformer Prime sells for $499 for the 32 gig version, and the 64 gig version will be $100 more, though it's not actually available yet in stores as far as I know. And the Motorola XYBoard 10.1 starts at $479 for the 16 gig with a 2-year contract. If you don't get that contract, it's $699. So that's kind of pricey. By the way, if you want this tablet and you don't particularly want to commit to a Verizon contract, you can get it with month-to-month data, so you can just get 1 month's worth of data and cancel the data and use it as a Wi-Fi tablet. XYBoard is also available in 32 gig and 64 gig models, and each size increment goes up $100 in price. Now, for those of you who are overseas, the Zoom 2 is probably more reasonably priced, and they might even be comparable to the Transformer Prime. Both tablets have a 10.1-inch IPS display. Asus calls theirs their super bright display, and it does have a super bright outdoor mode. Now, the XYBoard 10.1 has an IPS display as well, and it's extremely bright. There is no IPS super bright option on it. You just use the brightness slider, or you use the auto brightness. And by the way, the auto brightness setting is one of the few on a tablet that actually works well. It's reasonably bright. It's not going to blind you bright, but it's bright enough versus Samsung tablets and even the Transformer Prime that tend to run too dull and dark on auto brightness. Both of these have 1280 by 800 pixel displays, a standard resolution for an Android 10-inch tablet. They have a gig of RAM, and they have dual cameras. Now, the Transformer Prime has an 8 megapixel rear camera that can shoot 1080p video, whereas the XYBoard has a 5 megapixel rear main camera that can shoot 720p video. We haven't had much luck with our Transformer Prime's camera, though. It tends to take very grainy pictures, and we tried a second Transformer Prime, and it was doing the same thing. And this is after the camera firmware update. Focusing behavior was fine on it, but just graininess in 9 out of 10 pictures, kind of weird. The XYBoard takes pretty sharp pictures and has reliable focus, but obviously you're going down in resolution there and you're losing that 1080p capability. Both tablets have Wi-Fi 802.11bgn, Bluetooth, and a GPS. Now, the XYBoard is a better bet for those of you who really care about the GPS. Anything that has an integrated cellular radio tends to have very fast GPS satellite acquisition times. That helps to have that cellular radio because it can do tower triangulation. It doesn't even need to have Wi-Fi on to do that kind of thing. XYBoard, even indoors, just picks up 5 to 7 satellites like that, no problem. Transformer Prime, I think at this point, its GPS problems are pretty well noted on various forums and websites, and it has a great deal of difficulty holding on to a signal. Indoors, you generally can't get it fixed. If you take it outdoors under a clear sky, you can get it fixed, but once you start moving around, putting in a car, that kind of a thing, it really doesn't manage to hold on to your location well and provide reliable turn-by-turn directions. So if GPS is important to you, definitely the XYBoard is the better pick. The Transformer Prime is in many ways just the faster, thinner version of the original Asus ePad Transformer. It doesn't really add any new features. It gets a brighter IPS display. Obviously it is thinner, it is lighter, and it has that quad-core Tegra 3, which is a pretty exciting thing to have. Now, other manufacturers like Motorola with their second generation tablets have started to add extra features in, which makes it interesting. For example, you get this digital pen. This is an active dual digitizer, an N-trig digitizer. It works with both capacitive touch and with this pen. And that means you can do things like take notes and draw. So you've got the floating note application, and you can just write and draw and all that kind of thing. Now, there are other tablets like the HTC Jetstream particularly that have better pressure sensitivity for those of you who like to draw, but beyond that, this works very well, and an active digitizer is always going to be more precise than a capacitive stylus, which tends to skip around if you're trying to do long strokes or drawing or that kind of thing. So definitely a pick for you note takers, the XYBoard. The other neat feature, and this is something we're starting to see in more tablets, is AV remote control. It has an IR blaster up top, so you aim this at your AV gear, your home stereo, your AV receiver, that kind of stuff. And you can control all of your home theater equipment. You can see here you've got the remote control interface for your cable box, your TV, all that kind of stuff. And you've got a programming grid over here. This comes with Digit software. So this will look up, and if you hit the watch button, it'll actually change your cable box or your TV, depending on what your setup is, to the appropriate channel so you can watch something. So those are some of the special additions that you get with the XYBoard. Where the Asus Transformer Prime really pulls ahead is in performance. Now, in terms of synthetic benchmarks, this is interesting. Maybe this will change with Android OS 4.0 Ice Cream Sandwich with its multi-core optimizations. Maybe some benchmark applications will get updated to test all the threads and cores that are possible. But in Quadrant and Linpack, these two actually score about the same, despite the fact that this is a 1.2 gigahertz dual-core CPU, and this is up to 1.4 gigahertz quad-core CPU. Now it's 1.4 gigahertz when it's running one core only, steps down to 1.3 or 1.2 gigahertz otherwise when it's running multiple cores. But on those benchmarks, we get the same numbers. Where the Prime does pull ahead is the Antutu benchmark, where it gets about 10,000 versus 5,500 for the XYBoard. And if you're doing OpenGL tests with GL benchmark, then the Prime is about twice as fast. So certainly there's some significant improvements there in terms of performance. Now both of these guys can play Shadowgun, Grand Theft Auto 3, and Riptide just fine, but what you get with the Transformer Prime are Tegra Zone optimized games for the Tegra 3. Now right now there aren't a lot of games that are updated for the Tegra 3, but there are a few. An example, in Riptide you get a lot more water effects, you can see more detail on the water, and you get splashes on the screen. Shadowgun has more detail if you get the Tegra 3 version, which is the THD version of Shadowgun, so make sure you buy the right one. So there's certainly some benefits to be had there, and probably going forward we'll see more of that. Will we see more Tegra 3 tablets? I'm sure we will, but right now it's interesting to see the market isn't really flooding with those coming up for Q1 2012. We see a lot of interesting dual-core options, the new Qualcomm Crate dual-core CPU, for example, on a 28-nanometer process, which means it's very power efficient. So right now, looking at what Q1's coming up to offer, it looks like the Asus Transformer Prime may be the only one with the Tegra 3, at least for the short term. So if that's important to you, keep that in mind. The Transformer Prime would be the winner. Now in terms of connectivity, you have Wi-Fi 802.11b/Gn on both of these tablets, and of course the XYBoard adds that 4G LTE radio. And Verizon has pretty good coverage across the US for 4G. Data speeds for us have been averaging near 20 megabit down and about 5 to 6 up, which is pretty rip-rockin' fast. So for those of you who do need data anywhere, well, with the Transformer Prime is Wi-Fi only. You're going to want to use either the mobile hotspot feature in your phone, a MiFi, that kind of thing, or otherwise consider a tablet with built-in 4G like the XYBoard. For those of you who have no need for that, you only use it at home or at hotspot places with Wi-Fi, then why pay for that LTE feature that you're never going to use? In terms of battery life, they're actually both quite similar. They've been running about 8 hours for us on a charge. The XYBoard actually does a little bit better with Wi-Fi turned on versus LTE. LTE is a pretty big power consumer, so we see about 7.75 hours on LTE on average, and we've gotten up to 8.5 on Wi-Fi. Where the Transformer Prime stands out, just like the original Transformer, is the optional keyboard dock. That's $149, and it's basically a keyboard and trackpad section. Looks like the bottom half of your notebook computer, and that's how it functions. This just slips right into it. You can close it up just like a notebook, protects the screen. Fairly slim and fairly light device. It adds one USB host port, that's a full-size USB port, and a keyboard and a trackpad, as well as an additional battery that extends battery life. It doesn't quite double it. It works like the original Transformer in that it acts as a secondary recharging battery for the main unit. But it'll get you certainly about 12 hours combined, which is really phenomenal. Speaking of USB hosts, the Motorola XYBoard has a micro USB port, and it does support USB hosts. So if you have a micro USB on-the-go cable, you can use things like flash drives, USB keyboards, and that kind of thing without having to buy a $149 dock that you might not need. Both tablets can play 1080p video, and they have HDMI out. And the interesting thing about the Transformer Prime is that it can support 3D out. So if you have a 3D TV, you can actually play 3D content, which is pretty cool. If you play Riptide GP, plug it into your 3D TV, it's going to tell you to put on your 3D glasses now. It also can output 5.1 channel audio versus just stereo on the XYBoard. Now one thing I found though is that there's no control over what channels you're outputting, nothing like that. So we had some problems with the Transformer Prime, sometimes confusing our TVs, which, HD TVs generally only have stereo speakers built in, and sometimes we would only get the left channel audio, that kind of thing. If you plug it into the AV receiver, as we did, we have a late model Sony AV receiver with HDMI, and it noted 5.1 right away for the input, but we also noticed the Transformer Prime is doing strange things like upsampling to 5.1 for music tracks in Google Music, which, well, those should just be stereo tracks. And again, sometimes we had some wonky channel behavior, things coming out in the wrong channel. So that's our smackdown between the Motorola XYBoard 10.1, otherwise known as the Zoom 2, and the Asus Transformer Prime. And really, they're aiming at two different segments of the market, I think. The Transformer Prime is for those who are price conscious and who are looking for the latest and cutting edge performance, kind of like a high performance Asus motherboard, you just want it because it's the fastest darn thing in the world. And also, Asus has said that they will release a bootloader unlocker for the Prime. Now, that will void your warranty, but for those of you who really love to tinker and hack around and put on alternative ROMs that are running on different kernels, you can do that. The XYBoard has a lockdown bootloader. It seems unlikely that we'll be able to do anything about that, though it should be rootable. Now, the XYBoard is really for customers who may be looking for a little extra support from Verizon wireless stores that are everywhere, but beyond that, those of you who need LTE 4G connectivity everywhere, you're not near mobile hotspots, you need to get work done. If the GPS is important for you, that's something. And if you're also looking for some of those added little special features like the note-taking capability with this pen. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to watch our video reviews of each of these tablets and read our full written reviews.